Cole Harrington had worked the early shift long enough to know every sound the building made before the rest of the city woke up. The low hum of the HVAC system cycling through its first rotation, the distant clatter of room service carts being loaded in the basement kitchen, the soft hydraulic exhale of the elevator doors opening onto the lobby. At that hour, the marble floors reflected the overhead lights in long, pale ribbons, and the concierge desk sat empty except for a single attendant scrolling through a phone behind a potted arrangement of white orchids. Cole stood outside under the porte-cochere, hands in the pockets of his burgundy vest, watching the sky above Broadway turn from black to a deep, bruised purple. His breath fogged faintly in the February air. Nashville winters were mild by northern standards, but this particular morning had a bite to it. The kind of cold that found the gaps in your collar and settled there. He was 28 years old and had been parking cars at the Grand Hyatt for 3 years. Before that, he'd worked at a smaller hotel off Charlotte Pike, and before that he'd spent 18 months trying to make something happen with the construction crew his uncle ran out of Antioch. Nothing had ever quite clicked into place, not in a way that felt permanent. The valet job paid decently, the tips were generous when the right guests came through, and the schedule gave him enough flexibility to spend time with his father on the days when Dennis Harrington needed him most. Those days had become more frequent. Cole pulled out his phone and checked the time. 5:12 a.m. The black Escalade belonging to a record executive from Sony Nashville would need to be pulled around by 5:45. He had a mental list, he always did, of which cars needed to move first, who was checking out, what the front desk had flagged as priority pickups. His supervisor, Janet Kowalski, called it a gift. Cole called it necessity. You paid attention in this job or you made mistakes. And mistakes in a hotel like the Grand Hyatt had consequences. Janet had been his first real advocate at the property. A stout woman in her mid-50s with a perpetual lanyard around her neck and reading glasses she was always losing. She'd taken Cole on as a favor to her brother-in-law and then kept him because, as she put it, "You're the only valet I've ever had who actually remembers which guests don't want their radio touched." She ran the front-of-house operations with the relaxed authority of someone who had seen everything and could no longer be surprised. Cole respected that about her. He walked to the valet stand, checked the keyboard, and began organizing the morning sequence in his head. That was when Roger Caldwell came through the revolving door. Cole knew Roger by reputation more than by frequent contact. He was in his mid-60s, trim and silver-haired, with the particular kind of confidence that came not from physical size, but from decades of being the most important person in whatever room he occupied. He was the senior vice president of artist development at Meridian Sound Group, one of the 3 or 4 labels in Nashville that could genuinely be called powerful. He wore a charcoal overcoat over a pressed shirt, no tie, and carried a leather portfolio under one arm. His shoes were Italian. Cole had noticed the shoes on Roger's first stay months ago, the way he noticed everything, catalogued it, and filed it away without knowing why. Roger didn't acknowledge Cole. He rarely did. He walked to the far end of the porte-cochere, pulled out his phone, and made a call in a low voice, turning slightly away. Cole began moving toward the parking structure. He wasn't trying to listen. The thing was, the porte-cochere had an acoustic quality that the architects had probably never considered, a slight concave curvature in the ceiling that funneled sound in unexpected directions. Cole had noticed it before. Guests having private conversations near the south pillar were sometimes clearly audible from the valet stand, 20 feet away, as if they were standing right beside you. Roger was standing near the south pillar. "It doesn't matter what she knows," Roger was saying, his voice measured and flat. "She's not going to go digging. She never does. That's not who REBA is." A pause. Cole was at the keyboard, his back partially turned, lifting the Escalade fob. "The Harrington thing." Roger's voice again. "That's ancient history. 23 years. The man is dying, for God's sake. Let him die quietly." Cole stopped moving. "The paperwork is clean. Always has been. Whatever Dennis told his kid, it doesn't matter. There's no documentation that ties it back to the label." Another pause. "No. She doesn't need to know. She is not going to find out from us. And if that valet kid starts making noise, we deal with it the same way we dealt with everything else, quietly." The lobby door opened behind Roger and he turned, ending the call with a curt word Cole didn't catch. Cole stood at the keyboard for a long moment, the Escalade fob in his hand, his pulse doing something irregular in his throat. The Harrington thing. The man is dying. That valet kid. He had never told anyone at the hotel his last name. He was sure of that. The name tag read only Cole in block letters, but Roger Caldwell knew who he was, had known, and had described his father, Dennis Harrington, who was at this moment lying in a hospital bed at Vanderbilt with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, surrounded by medical debt that Cole was slowly, desperately trying to manage, as someone to be handled, someone to be kept quiet. Cole's father had told him the story once, 6 months ago, during one of the harder nights when the morphine made Dennis loose-tongued and sad in a way he usually kept locked down. He'd written a song in 1999, a complete composition, melody, lyrics, the whole arrangement sketched out on paper in the apartment on Gallatin Pike, where he'd been living with Cole's mother. He'd played it for a producer named Mitch Vance, who worked for what was then a smaller imprint eventually absorbed into Meridian Sound Group. Mitch had said he'd circulate it. 3 months later, the song appeared on a REBA McENTIRE album, credited to 2 different writers, neither of them Dennis Harrington. It went to number 4 on the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart. Dennis had tried. He'd made calls, sent letters, eventually hired a lawyer he couldn't afford. The lawyer found nothing actionable. The paperwork, as Roger had just confirmed, was clean. The original composition existed only in Dennis's memory and in a handwritten notebook that had been lost during a move in 2002. Cole had always believed his father. Not because fathers were always right, but because he knew the specific texture of that grief, the way Dennis held it. It wasn't the hot bitterness of a liar caught. It was the dull, permanent ache of someone who had stopped expecting justice. He pulled the Escalade around and returned to the stand. At 6:15 a.m., the front desk called the valet station to confirm a 7 a.m. departure for one of the penthouse suites. The name on the reservation was not listed, flagged as private per the guest's standard request. But Janet had told Cole the night before, when handing off the shift notes, that the penthouse was occupied by REBA McENTIRE and her traveling team. She was in Nashville for the Country Music Association's annual industry breakfast at the Omni, happening that morning at 9. She'd arrive, give a keynote, shake hands, and be wheels up to Oklahoma by early afternoon. Cole had 2 hours. He didn't sleep. He stood at the valet stand and turned the problem over and over in his mind, like a stone he couldn't put down. What did he actually have? A conversation he'd overheard by accident, no recording, no witnesses, a sick man's story from 23 years ago, and a notebook that no longer existed. Against that, a senior executive at a major label, lawyers on retainer, and a celebrity with no reason to believe a stranger handing her cars. What he had was this: REBA McENTIRE was a human being. He'd read enough about her over the years, not as a fan exactly, but as someone who grew up around the music the way you grew up around weather. To know that she was not a distant figure. She was known for remembering names, for stopping when other people walked past. She'd grown up working. She understood what it meant to build something from nothing and to lose it. He also knew that she was leaving at 7 o'clock, and that if he didn't say something to her face directly before she stepped into that SUV, the window would close. Permanently. His father had 3 months, maybe 4, according to Dr. Alicia Pemberton at Vanderbilt. The cancer was not responding to the second round of treatment. There would not be a better moment than this one. Cole wrote 3 sentences on the back of a valet ticket in pencil. He folded it and put it in his vest pocket. Then he went back to work. At 6:52 a.m., the elevator opened in the lobby and the advance team came through first. 2 young men with earpieces, a woman with a clipboard Cole would later learn was REBA's personal assistant, Donna Fielding, and a road manager named Brett Okafor, who moved with the focused energy of someone tracking 17 variables simultaneously. They swept the lobby, confirmed the vehicle lineup with Janet at the desk, and positioned themselves near the entrance. Then REBA McENTIRE came through the lobby. Cole had seen famous people come through the Grand Hyatt before. Senators, NFL players, a former president's security detail, musicians whose faces were on billboards 3 blocks away. Most of them carried their fame like luggage, visibly a little heavily. REBA didn't. She walked through the lobby the way someone walks through a place they feel comfortable in, with an easy, unhurried step, speaking quietly to Donna about something on the clipboard as they moved. She wore a dark wool coat and her red hair was pulled back, and she looked, Cole thought, exactly like what she was. Someone who had been working hard for a very long time and had made peace with the pace of it. She was also, he realized with a lurch, going to reach the door in about 45 seconds. Brett Okafor was already outside checking the vehicle. The 2 men with earpieces flanked the entrance. Donna was on her phone. Cole stepped forward. "Ms. McENTIRE." His voice came out steady. He was almost surprised by that. "I'm Cole. I'm one of the valets. Your car is ready. I just need a moment before you go." Donna looked up sharply. One of the earpiece men shifted his weight. REBA looked at Cole, not past him. At him, directly, with a calm, assessing quality that was not unfriendly, but was not casual either. "What kind of moment?" she asked. 30 seconds, Cole said. "Please." A beat passed. Donna opened her mouth. REBA raised one hand slightly, not dismissively, just a small gesture that meant hold on, and kept her eyes on Cole. "Okay," she said. Cole pulled the folded valet ticket from his vest pocket. "My father's name is Dennis Harrington. In 1999, he wrote a song that ended up on one of your albums. He didn't get credit. He tried to fight it, and there was nothing to find because the paperwork was fixed." He paused. "I know that sounds like something you hear all the time. I know you probably can't verify it, standing on a curb at 7 in the morning. He held out the ticket. "His name, his phone number, and the name of the song are on here. That's all I'm asking, that you know his name before he dies." The words landed in the cold morning air. REBA didn't reach for the ticket immediately. She studied Cole's face for a moment, the particular way a person looks at another person when they're deciding whether what they're hearing is grief or manipulation, and whether it matters which one it is. Then she took the ticket. "What song?" she said. "Leave the Light On," Cole said. "Track 7 on Room to Breathe, 2000. He wrote the original in 1999. He called it Leaving a Light." REBA was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her expression. Not recognition exactly, but something adjacent to it. A slight tightening around the eyes that might have meant anything or nothing. "How sick is he?" she asked. 3 months, Cole said. "Maybe 4. She folded the ticket and held it in her hand. Brett appeared at the door and caught her eye. She gave him a nod. "I'll be in touch," she said to Cole. It was not a promise. It was not a dismissal. It was the only honest thing she could offer in that moment, and Cole understood that. He held the door, and she walked through it. The black SUV pulled away from the porte cochere at 7:03 a.m. Cole stood on the curb for a long moment, the cold working its way under his collar, and watched the vehicle merge into the thin morning traffic on Broadway. Then he went back to the keyboard and pulled the next car. He didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not Janet, not his colleague Pete Dawson, who showed up for the mid-morning shift at 8 and immediately began telling a long story about a parking dispute from the night before that Cole absorbed without actually hearing. He smiled where appropriate and nodded and moved cars and processed tips, and by 11 o'clock he had convinced himself, quietly and efficiently, that nothing would come of it. His phone buzzed at 1:47 p.m. The number was a 615 area code he didn't recognize. Cole. It was a woman's voice. Not Reba, younger, brisk, professional. "This is Donna Fielding. I work with Reba McEntire. She'd like to speak with your father. Are you able to facilitate that?" Cole was standing in the parking structure on level 2, a Mercedes key in his hand. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I can do that. We're in the air right now. We land in Tulsa at 4. She'll call from there." A pause. "Cole, she wants you to know that she remembers that song." The line went quiet. Cole stood in the parking structure for a very long time after that, the Mercedes key in his hand, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, the sound of the city traffic drifting up from the street below. He thought about his father in the hospital bed on the 7th floor of Vanderbilt, the way Dennis's hands looked now, thinner than they used to be, the veins more visible, the skin with a yellowish cast that the doctors explained with terms Cole had learned to translate. He thought about a notebook lost in a move 24 years ago. He thought about a song that had played on the radio while he was in elementary school, that his father would always go quiet around, leaving the room in a way that young Cole had attributed to something else entirely. He walked back to the valet stand and finished his shift. Dennis Harrington had been a careful man his whole life. Not cautious, there was a difference, one that mattered to him, but careful. He'd been careful with money, careful with words, careful with the specific quality of his hopes. It was a habit built partly from upbringing and partly from experience. From the early years in Nashville, when he'd arrived from Knoxville at 22 with a battered Gibson and a spiral notebook full of lyrics and the particular kind of confidence that has not yet been educated by failure. He'd been careful after the song, too. He hadn't raged publicly, hadn't shown up at the label's offices, hadn't made himself into the kind of story that could be used against him. He'd made his calls, sent his letters, hired the lawyer, and when the lawyer found nothing, he'd folded it away inside himself and built a different life. A smaller one, with different parameters. He'd worked construction for 20 years. He'd been a decent father, though not always a present one. He'd made peace with Nashville in the way that a person makes peace with a city that rejected them, not by forgiving it exactly, but by no longer expecting anything from it. He had not made peace with the song. Cole knew this because of the way Dennis had told him about it, not with the loose, morphine-softened sadness of a man unburdening himself, but with the precise, careful language of someone who had rehearsed the facts so many times they'd become structural, load-bearing. Dennis had not let himself be sentimental about it. The facts were the facts. The song existed. He had written it. It had been taken. When Cole walked into room 714 at Vanderbilt that evening and told his father that Reba McEntire remembered the song, Dennis Harrington was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She remembered it?" "She said she remembers it," Cole said. "She's calling tonight." Dennis looked at the ceiling for a moment. His hands, folded on the thin hospital blanket, did not move. "I'm not looking for money," Dennis said finally. "I want you to understand that. At this point," he stopped, rearranged the sentence. "I want someone who matters to know that it was mine." "I know, Dad." "That's all it is. I know." The phone rang at 6:41 p.m. Reba McEntire had been in the music business for nearly 50 years. That was not a fact she spent much time sitting with. Sentiment wasn't particularly productive, and she had always operated on the principle that looking backward was something you did at the end of the night, not during the workday. But there were moments, usually in transit, usually in the particular stillness of being airborne, between one obligation and the next, when the accumulation of it settled around her like weather. She was thinking about Room to Breathe. The album had come out in the spring of 2000, at a complicated moment in her career, not struggling exactly, but navigating. The prior 5 years had reshaped the industry around her, and she'd been recalibrating, working with new producers, testing material that felt different from what she'd been known for. Room to Breathe had been modest by her earlier standards. No crossover hit, no single that broke through to mainstream radio in the way some of her earlier work had. But it had a following, a quiet, loyal one. People wrote to her about that album specifically, decades later, describing the way certain tracks had accompanied particular moments in their lives. Leave the Light On was one of those tracks. She remembered the first time she'd heard the demo. It had come through Mitch Vance, who was A&R at the imprint they were working with at the time, a smaller operation that Meridian absorbed around 2003. The demo was rough, a single acoustic guitar, a male voice she'd never identified, the arrangement minimal, but the song itself was complete in a way that fully produced demos sometimes weren't. The structure was clean, the emotional arc was clear, and the bridge had a particular line. She still remembered the exact phrasing that made her stop and listen again. She'd asked Mitch who wrote it. He'd said a couple of guys from Murfreesboro. He'd given her 2 names she'd never heard and had no reason to doubt. That was how it worked, in those days especially. Songs arrived through pipelines, publishers, producers, A&R contacts, and the provenance was rarely something an artist interrogated at length. You trusted your team, you signed what the lawyers put in front of you. If the paperwork said 2 writers from Murfreesboro, then 2 writers from Murfreesboro had written the song, and whoever had handed it to Mitch had done the necessary clearing. REBA had trusted Mitch Vance's operation because she'd had no reason not to. She understood, somewhere between Nashville and Tulsa, at 30,000 feet with her assistant dozing in the seat across the aisle, that this understanding was precisely what Roger Caldwell had been counting on for 23 years. She was not a woman who was easy to make angry. She had been in an industry defined by the casual exercise of power over people with less of it, and she had learned early that reactive anger was expensive. It cost clarity. It cost leverage. When she was angry, she tended to go quiet first. Not cold, just quiet, in a way that people who knew her well recognized as a state to pay attention to. She was quiet for most of the flight to Tulsa. Donna sat in the next room of the Tulsa hotel suite, nominally reviewing the next day's schedule, actually listening to the one-sided cadence of REBA's voice through the partially open door. The extended silences that meant she was listening, the few short responses, the tone that was neither the professional warmth of a public appearance nor the careful neutrality of a business call, but something more deliberate than either. When REBA came out, she sat down across from Donna and looked at the middle distance for a moment. "He's not asking for money," she said. "Okay," Donna said. "He's not asking for anything, actually. He wanted to tell someone the story. Someone specific." She paused. He described the original composition. The structure, the specific chord changes, a lyric in the second verse that didn't make it into the final recording. She looked at Donna. "Donna, I know that second verse lyric. Mitch told me it tested poorly, and we cut it. I remember it. I remember it exactly." Donna kept her expression neutral. She had worked for REBA for 11 years and knew that this was not the moment for editorial opinion. "His son is the valet," REBA said. "Yes. He's been working at that hotel for 3 years." She paused. "Roger Caldwell stays there regularly." "He does," Donna confirmed. She'd already looked this up. Reba stood up and moved to the window. The Tulsa at night, the highway lights, the flat dark distance that deepened beyond the city limits in every direction. "I want to talk to Frank DeLuca," she said. Frank DeLuca was her entertainment attorney, based in Nashville, whom she had worked with for over 20 years. Not the label's attorneys, Frank. "I'll call him in the morning." "Tonight, Donna." "Of course." Reba turned from the window. "And find out everything you can about Mitch Vance, where he is, what he's doing, whether he's still connected to Meridian." Donna was already typing. Frank DeLuca took the call at 9:15 p.m., which was not unusual. He had long ago made peace with the reality that his most important clients did not observe business hours when something was urgent. He listened without interrupting while Reba laid out what Cole had told her, what Dennis had described on the phone, and what she remembered about the song and its acquisition. When she finished, Frank was quiet for a moment. "Before I say anything useful," he said, "I need to know one thing. Is there documentation? Anything on Dennis Harrington's end? Original recordings, dated manuscripts, correspondence with Mitch Vance or the imprint?" He says there was a notebook, lost in a move. "Okay." Another pause. "That's the hard part. Without contemporaneous documentation, you're essentially relying on testimony, which is not nothing, especially if there are multiple corroborating accounts, but it makes the legal pathway more complicated." "I'm not necessarily talking about a legal pathway yet, Frank. I understand that. I'm telling you what the terrain looks like if it becomes one." He cleared his throat. "Here's the other thing. Meridian absorbed that imprint in 2003. Roger Caldwell was involved in that acquisition. If he knew about a plagiarism issue at the time, or if the issue predated the acquisition and was deliberately buried in the due diligence, that's a different and significantly more serious problem. For Meridian. Would it affect me? Not legally. You were the recording artist. You had no role in the acquisition of the composition rights. Your exposure is reputational, not legal." A pause. "But reputational exposure is real, Reba. Depending on how this surfaces and how it's framed, some of the mud will find you, regardless of what you knew or didn't know." "I know that. And you're telling me you want to pursue it anyway." "I'm telling you I want to understand my options," she said. "There's a man dying in a Nashville hospital who wrote a song I've performed hundreds of times without knowing his name. Yes, Frank. I want to understand my options." Frank DeLuca had known Reba McEntire for over 2 decades. He knew better than to waste time on caution she'd already considered. "I'll pull the copyright registrations on the track first thing tomorrow," he said. "And I want to know who the 2 credited writers are. Whether they're real people with verifiable histories as songwriters or whether they're names that were put on a form for a reason." "Thank you, Frank. Get some sleep." She did not get much sleep. Cole, meanwhile, sat in the parking lot of Vanderbilt Medical Center at 10:30 p.m. In his car, a 2017 Honda Civic with a cracked rear bumper cover he hadn't gotten around to fixing, and stared at the hospital's lit facade. He'd sat with his father for 2 hours after the phone call ended. Dennis had been quiet, in the particular way he got after something moved him, not sad, not excited, just settled, as if an internal pressure had equalized. He'd asked Cole to turn on the television, and they'd watched part of a documentary about the Mississippi River in companionable silence. And when Cole had gotten up to leave, Dennis had gripped his hand once, briefly and firmly, and then let go. Cole sat in the parking lot and thought about what he'd set in motion. He was not naive. He understood that Roger Caldwell's comment that morning, that valet kid, meant that his connection to Dennis was known, had been tracked, and had been assessed as a manageable risk. Whatever happened next would not be unnoticed by people with significantly more resources than Cole possessed. He did not have a lawyer, he did not have documentation. He had an overheard phone call, a sick man's testimony, and the fact that REBA MCENTIRE had taken a folded valet ticket out of his hand and said she remembered the song. He also had, he realized, nothing left to lose that he hadn't already been losing. His father was dying. The medical debt was approaching $90,000. Cole's income covered the apartment and the minimum payments and not much else. The trajectory was fixed. There was no version of staying quiet in which anything improved. He drove home to his apartment on Meridian Hill, a street name he'd never found funny until now, and sat at the kitchen table and wrote down everything he could remember from Roger Caldwell's phone call. Every word he could reconstruct verbatim, with a timestamp and a location note. He signed and dated the bottom of the page. It was not documentation, but it was something. He put it in the kitchen drawer and went to bed. Pete Dawson noticed something was different about Cole the next morning, which was saying something, because Pete's primary mode of engaging with the world was cheerful inattention. Pete was 24, a transplant from Louisville who'd been at the Grand Hyatt for 8 months and treated the job with the light, portable detachment of someone who had not yet decided what the job actually was. "You look like you slept bad," Pete told Cole at the start of the shift. "I'm fine." "You look like my uncle the week before he decided to sue his landlord." Cole looked at him. "What happened with that?" "He lost," Pete said cheerfully, and went to get the first car. Janet Kowalski appeared at the stand at 8:15, earlier than usual. She had her reading glasses on, which meant she was in administrative mode. "Cole," she said, "can I talk to you for a minute?" They stepped into the small supervisor's office off the valet lobby. A narrow room with a desk, a monitor showing the parking structure cameras, and a corkboard covered in shift schedules and laminated policy cards. "We got a call this morning," Janet said, sitting down and looking at him directly, "from hotel management, from above my level." She paused. "They're not happy with a reported interaction between a valet staff member and a departing guest yesterday morning. They described it as the staff member approaching the guest unsolicited with a personal matter." Cole said nothing. "The guest apparently has not complained," Janet continued, "but someone else has, flagged it internally." She studied him. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Cole considered. He trusted Janet as much as he trusted anyone in this building, which was to say conditionally, in the way that professional relationships operated, not with full disclosure, but without active deception. "I spoke to a guest on her way out," he said. "Briefly, it was a personal matter. She responded politely and left without issue. The concern is about protocol." "I understand that." "The concern is also," Janet said more quietly, "that the person who made the call to management was not from the hotel's internal complaints process. It came through an outside channel." She paused. "Cole, I don't know what you did, and I'm not going to push you on it, but I need you to know that someone with pull made a call this morning specifically about you." Cole felt the weight of it settle, not with surprise, but with the dull confirmation of something he'd already understood in abstract. "Thank you, Janet," he said. "Just be careful," she said, "whatever it is." He went back to work. "Frank DeLuca, REBA's attorney, would like to speak with you and your father, both of you if that's possible. He's in Nashville. Can you make yourself available tomorrow morning?" Cole was standing on level 3 of the parking structure. "Yes," he said. "He'd also like to know, and I want to be clear, there's no pressure here, this is purely for context, whether your father ever made any record of the original composition. A recording, even informal, written materials, correspondence." "There was a notebook," Cole said. "He lost it in a move in 2002. A pause. "Okay. Does he remember the name of the person he moved with? Or the address he moved from?" Cole hadn't thought about that. "I can ask him. Please. Sometimes these things have more threads than people expect." A beat. "Cole, REBA wanted me to tell you something directly. She said, tell him I'm not going away." Cole stood in the parking structure and listened to the fluorescent lights hum. "Okay," he said. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Frank's office is on 4th Avenue South." He wrote down the address. He went to Vanderbilt that evening and sat with his father and asked about the move. Dennis thought for a long time. "I moved from the apartment on Gallatin Pike to a place in Madison," he said. "March of 2002. I rented a truck. My friend Gary Whitmore helped me." A pause. "He might still be around. Gary was solid people." "Do you remember what happened to the notebook?" Dennis was quiet for a moment. "I packed it myself. I put it in a box with some other papers and a couple of books." He stopped. "The box got wet. There was a leak in the Madison place. First week I was there, I threw out anything that was ruined." "Was the notebook ruined?" Dennis didn't answer right away. Cole watched his father's face, the particular quality of concentration that Dennis applied to memory, treating it the way he'd once described good carpentry work, methodically, without rushing toward a result. "There was a cassette," Dennis said finally. Cole looked up. "I recorded a demo in my friend's home studio. Roy Fenton. He had a setup in his garage out in Hermitage. This was late '98, early '99, before I played it for Mitch." Dennis looked at the ceiling. "I don't know what Roy did with that cassette. I never asked for it back. When everything fell apart, I left it. Does Roy Fenton still live in Hermitage?" "I have no idea," Dennis said. "We lost touch a long time ago." Cole took out his phone and opened a search engine. There were 4 Roy Fentons in the Nashville metropolitan area. He started making calls. Roy Fenton was 61 years old and still lived in Hermitage, though not in the house with the garage studio. That house had been sold in 2008. He now lived in a smaller place on Andrew Jackson Parkway, drove a truck for a regional freight company, and had, as of Cole's call at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, not thought about Dennis Harrington in at least 15 years. "Dennis Harrington," Roy said, with the slow, ruminative tone of someone excavating a specific drawer of memory. "Sure. Yeah, skinny guy. Good ear. Came through my place a few times with material." A pause. "He got sick?" "He's very sick," Cole said. "I'm his son. I'm sorry to hear that." "Mr. Fenton, I need to ask you something. In 1998 or 1999, did you record a demo with my father, a song called Leaving a Light?" The pause on the other end of the line was longer than the others. "Yeah," Roy said slowly. "Yeah, I remember that one. That was a good song." Another pause. "He never did anything with it?" "Someone else did," Cole said. "We're trying to find the original recording." Roy Fenton was quiet for a moment. "I cleared out the garage studio when I sold the house. Most of the old tapes went with the equipment. I sold the whole setup to a guy in Smyrna. But I kept some things. Personal recordings. Sessions I thought were worth something." Cole's hand tightened on the phone. "Do you think there's any chance you still have it?" "I honestly don't know," Roy said. "I've got boxes in my storage unit I haven't opened in years, but I'd remember that session. That song stuck with me." He paused. "Let me look. Give me a day. Mr. Fenton, this matters more than I can really explain over the phone. My father is—" Cole stopped, rearranged. "He has a few months. If that recording exists, it changes things for him." Another long pause. "I'll look tonight," Roy said. Frank DeLuca's office occupied the 4th floor of a building on 4th Avenue South that had been renovated in the past decade from a garment warehouse into the kind of mixed-use professional space that Nashville's growth kept producing. Exposed brick, high ceilings, large windows overlooking the street. The waiting area had leather chairs and back issues of Billboard and Music Row in a rack near the door, which Cole found darkly funny. Frank DeLuca was a compact man in his early 60s, grey at the temples, with the calm and unhurried manner of someone who had spent decades in high-stakes rooms. He stood when Cole came in, shook hands without excessive warmth or coldness, and gestured to a chair across from his desk. Dennis had not been able to come in person. Cole had called ahead. Frank had said a phone call would work as a preliminary. "I want to be clear about where we are," Frank said, settling into his chair. "I represent REBA MCENTIRE. My primary obligation is to her interests. But her interests, in this situation, happen to align with yours in some important ways, and she's directed me to assist in determining the facts without prejudice to the extent that's possible." Cole nodded. "I pulled the copyright registrations for Leave the Light On yesterday evening," Frank said. He opened a folder on his desk. "The song is registered to 2 writers, Danny Kurtz and Victor Prala. Both Nashville-based, both active in the late 90s as session writers and co-writers for various imprints. Both have legitimate credits. They're real people with real careers." He paused. "However, when I looked at the timeline of their credits more carefully, I found something interesting. Neither Kurtz nor Prala has any other writing credit in the 3-year window on either side of this particular registration that is remotely similar in style or structure to Leave the Light On. It's anomalous in their catalogues." "Is that unusual?" Cole asked. "It's not proof of anything," Frank said. "Good writers produce singular work, but it's a thread." He closed the folder. "The more significant issue is this. When I contacted Danny Kurtz's current representative, Kurtz is semi-retired, still does occasional consulting work. His representative called back within 2 hours and said that Mr. Kurtz was unavailable for comment on any matters relating to catalogue from before 2003. That's an unusually specific window." Cole looked at him. "That sounds like someone warned them." "It sounds like that to me too," Frank said with measured restraint. "I can't establish it, but it sounds like that." He leaned forward slightly. "Now, tell me about the recording." Cole told him about Roy Fenton. Frank listened without expression until Cole finished. "If that cassette exists and is recoverable, and the recording predates the copyright registration by any meaningful margin, even a few months, it becomes the most important piece of evidence in this entire situation," Frank said. "Without it, we have testimony, circumstantial irregularities in the copyright record, and an overheard conversation that is inadmissible in any formal proceeding and would be contested vigorously. With it, with a clear, authenticated prior recording, you have a foundation for a claim, not a guarantee. The legal pathway for copyright disputes of this vintage is genuinely complicated, but a foundation." He paused. "How confident are you in Fenton?" "He said he'd look tonight." Frank nodded. "All right. We wait." He paused again with a slightly different quality, less procedural, more direct. "Cole, I want you to understand what you're potentially setting off. If this moves forward, if there's documentation and we pursue it, you're looking at a fight with Meridian Sound Group, Roger Caldwell specifically. These are people with institutional resources, experienced litigators, and considerable incentive to protect a 23-year-old arrangement that has been generating royalties since 2000. He held Cole's gaze. "Are you prepared for that?" Cole thought about his father's hands on the hospital blanket. He thought about the morphine and the yellow cast to the skin, and the way Dennis had said, "I want someone who matters to know that it was mine." "Yes," he said. Cole was at work. He stepped away from the valet stand, moving to the far end of the porte cochere, near the south pillar, the spot where Roger Caldwell had stood 2 mornings ago, and answered. "I found it," Roy said. The words were simple, and they hit Cole like a physical thing. "It's a cassette tape, 90-minute Maxell brand. I recorded the date on the label. I always did that with Sessions' old habit. It says February 14th, 1999, Valentine's Day." A pause, and Cole could hear the smile in Roy's voice without seeing it. "Your dad was a romantic about the song even then. He told me the title was Leaving a Light for the person who's always waiting up. Cole was gripping the phone hard enough that his knuckles were going white against the cold. The tape is in decent condition, Roy continued. I kept my cassettes in a sealed plastic bin, stored dry. I can't guarantee the audio quality until we play it, but it doesn't look degraded. A pause. I also found something else. A piece of paper, folded inside the cassette case. It's got the lyrics written out in your dad's handwriting with some chord notations, signed and dated. Cole closed his eyes. Mr. Venton, he said, I need to ask you something important. Are you willing to serve as a witness to the existence and provenance of this recording? A pause. Is this going to be a legal thing? It might be. Roy was quiet for a moment. Then, Dennis Harrington was a good man who got a bad deal. If he needs a witness, he's got one. The cassette arrived at Frank DeLuca's office the following morning via a courier Roy sent from Hermitage, packed carefully in a padded envelope with a handwritten note describing the recording session and the circumstances of the tape storage. Frank had it transferred to a digital audio workstation by an audio forensics professional he worked with occasionally, a woman named Dr. Priya Stafford at Vanderbilt's acoustics lab, who could also provide authentication testimony. The digital transfer took 3 hours. Cole was in Frank's office when they played it back for the first time. The recording was imperfect, a slight hiss. The ambient sound of a garage, the creak of a chair. Roy's home studio setup had been functional but not sophisticated. The guitar came through clearly, though, and the voice. Dennis Harrington's voice in 1999 had been something. Cole had not known this. He had never heard his father sing. By the time Cole was old enough to have real memories, Dennis had stopped. The voice on the tape was a younger man's, unmarked by the years of construction work and disappointment and illness, and it moved through the melody of Leave the Light On, through Leaving a Light, which was the same song wearing its original name, with the particular authority of someone singing something they wrote, inhabiting it from the inside. The second verse was there. The lyric that REBA had remembered and that Mitch Vance had told her tested poorly. Frank DeLuca listened to the whole thing without speaking. Dr. Stafford made notes. Cole sat in his chair and listened to his father's 27-year-old voice fill the room and did not look at anyone. When it ended, Frank was quiet for a long moment. The registration date for the Kurtz Prahler copyright is September 1999, he said. This recording is dated February 1999. We have 7 months. He closed his notepad. We have a case. REBA McENTIRE flew back to Nashville the following Friday. She did not stay at the Grand Hyatt. She came into Frank's office on a Thursday afternoon, sat across from Cole for the first time since the morning at the curb, and listened while Frank walked through what had been found. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment, in the same way she'd been quiet on the curb, not cold, not distant, just deliberate. I want to go see Dennis, she said. Cole looked at her. If he's willing, she said. I'm not going to show up uninvited, but I'd like to meet him. Cole called his father from the parking lot of Frank's building. Dennis was quiet for a long time after Cole explained. She wants to come here, he said. To the hospital, if you want her to. A very long pause. Yeah, Dennis said. Yeah, I think I do. Vanderbilt University Medical Center occupied several city blocks in the medical district, a dense constellation of towers and walkways connected by enclosed corridors that always struck Cole as slightly disorienting, a geography designed for efficiency rather than for the people navigating it. He had walked these corridors enough times in the past 6 months that he no longer needed the directory signs, moving on muscle memory through the turns and elevator banks to the 7th floor, South Wing, room 714. He arrived 20 minutes before REBA to give his father warning. Dennis was sitting up in the bed when Cole came in. This alone was notable. He'd been sleeping more in the past week, the fatigue increasing as the treatment margins contracted, and the upright posture required a deliberate effort that Cole could see in the set of Dennis's jaw and shoulders. "You don't have to perform," Cole told him. "I'm not performing," Dennis said, with a trace of his old dry precision. "I'm sitting up." Cole straightened the chair beside the bed, moved a cup of water to the bedside table, and stood near the window. The room had a view of a courtyard, bare winter trees, a concrete path, a bench nobody was using. The sky was low and grey, the kind of February sky that looked permanent. Reba arrived with Donna, and without any of the security presence Cole had seen at the hotel. She wore a grey coat and no makeup beyond the minimum, and she walked into room 714 the way she'd walked through the Grand Hyatt lobby, like someone who understood exactly where they were and had no need to announce it. She stopped at the foot of the bed and looked at Dennis Harrington. Dennis looked back at her. For a moment, the room was simply quiet. "Mr. Harrington," Reba said. "I'm glad to meet you." "I know who you are," Dennis said, with a slight dry quality that was the closest he got to humor these days. Reba smiled. Not the managed public smile Cole had seen in 1,000 photographs, but a real one, brief and warm. She pulled the chair closer and sat down. Cole moved toward the door. "You can stay," his father said, without looking at him. Cole stayed. What followed was a conversation that Cole would find himself returning to in the months and years afterward, not because of its content, which was in its way straightforward, but because of its texture. Reba did not perform contrition. She did not offer the practiced language of institutional apology. She told Dennis what she had told Frank DeLuca, that she'd heard the demo in late 1999, that she'd asked where it came from, that she'd been given names she had no reason to doubt. She told him about the second verse lyric, recited it from memory, still exactly right after 23 years, and said that she'd always felt it belonged in the song and had never understood why it was cut. Dennis listened to her say the lyric back to him, and something in his face shifted, not dramatically, not in the ways that dramatic moments tend to unfold, but quietly, in the way that a tightly held thing is finally released. "That's the line," he said. "That's the one." "I know," Reba said. There was a pause. "I'm not going to pretend this fixes anything," Reba said. "What happened to you was wrong. I don't know everything that went on at that label, and I'm going to spend some time finding out. But I wanted to come here and say, in person, directly to you, I know you wrote that song, I believe you, and I'm going to make sure that's on the record." Dennis was quiet for a long time. "On the record how?" he said. "In every way I can make it," she said. "My attorney is working on the legal pathway, but there's also a public record, and I have some ability to shape what goes into that." She paused. "I'd like to re-record the song with proper credit, your name on it, Leaving a Light, by Dennis Harrington. And I'd like to release it before—" She stopped. "Before I die," Dennis said. He said it without bitterness, as a plain fact. "Yes," Reba said with equal plainness. Dennis looked at the grey courtyard window for a moment. "I'd like that," he said. The conversation with Roger Caldwell happened without warning on a Tuesday afternoon, which was almost certainly intentional on Roger's part. He was a man who preferred to control the terrain of difficult conversations, and catching Cole on a shift at the valet stand in his work environment without preparation time was a reasonable tactical choice. Cole was pulling a Lexus sedan around when he spotted Roger standing at the valet stand in his overcoat, hands in his pockets, with the particular relaxed posture of someone who has decided in advance how a conversation is going to go. Cole parked the Lexus and walked over. "Cole," Roger said pleasantly. "How are you?" "Fine," Cole said. "Sir." "Good." Roger looked out at the street for a moment. "I understand you've been in contact with some of Reba's people." Cole said nothing. "I'm not here to threaten you," Roger said, still pleasantly. "I want to be clear about that. What I want to do is offer some context." He paused. The music industry in 1999 was a different environment. Songs moved through a lot of hands before they reached artists. The documentation practices were not what they are today. Sometimes, and I'm not excusing this, I'm explaining it, sometimes a song arrived through channels that were not fully transparent about its origin. By the time it was tracked, released, distributed, it was extremely difficult to unwind. "Is that an admission?" Cole said. Roger looked at him with something that was almost amusement. "It's context," he said. "Cole, your father is very sick. You have significant medical debt. I have the ability to be useful in both of those situations in a way that does not require years of litigation and the kind of public attention that tends to damage everyone it touches, including the people who think they're going to benefit from it." Cole looked at him steadily. "What kind of useful? The label has a discretionary fund for—" "No," Cole said. Roger paused. "No," Cole said again more clearly. "My father doesn't want money to make this go away. He wants his name on the song. That's what he wants, and that's what we're pursuing." He paused. "And I want to be honest with you, Mr. Caldwell. I wrote down everything I heard you say on that phone call the other morning. I dated it and signed it. I'm not recording this conversation, and I'm not going to misrepresent it. But I'm not going to take a settlement that erases what happened." Roger studied him for a long moment. The pleasant expression had not entirely left his face, but something had shifted behind it, a recalibration, Cole thought, of how much of a problem this actually was. "You're sure?" Roger said. "I'm sure." Roger nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. Then he turned and walked back through the revolving door. Pete Dawson materialized at Cole's shoulder approximately 3 seconds later. "Who was that?" "Someone from the industry," Cole said. "He looked like a guy from the industry," Pete said, and went to get the next car. Frank DeLuca's legal strategy, as he explained it to Cole and Dennis over a 3-way call that Thursday evening, had multiple tracks. The primary track was a copyright dispute claim based on the authenticated recording and the dated lyric sheet. A formal challenge to the Kurtz Prahler registration that would require the Copyright Office to consider evidence of prior authorship. This process was slow, genuinely uncertain, and expensive. Frank was clear about all 3 things. The secondary track was a demand letter to Meridian Sound Group, citing the evidence and requesting a voluntary renegotiation of the credit and royalty arrangement, effectively asking them to do the right thing before being forced to. "The demand letter goes out tomorrow," Frank said. "Their response, or lack thereof, tells us a great deal about how the next phase unfolds." "What about Danny Kurtz and Victor Prahl?" Cole asked, "the credited writers." "I've been working on that," Frank said. "Prahler is deceased. He passed in 2014. Kurtz is alive, and I've now made direct contact with him, bypassing his representative." A pause. "He's willing to talk. Off the record at this stage, but he's willing to talk, which means there may be more to learn about how those names ended up on that registration." Dennis was quiet on his end of the call for a moment. "Frank," he said, "how long does the legal process take? Realistically?" Frank was direct. "The claim alone, without a negotiated resolution, could take 18 months to 2 years. A pause. "And with a negotiated resolution? If Meridian decides it's in their interest to settle rather than fight, and I think there's a reasonable chance of that, given what we have, it could move significantly faster. Weeks, potentially, once the right people are in the right room." He paused. "The re-recording that REBA wants to do accelerates the public dimension of this considerably. Once she announces she's re-recording the song with new credit, Meridian has a public relations problem that litigation can't fully solve." "When is she recording it?" Dennis asked. She's booked a session at RCA Studio B, Frank said. 3 weeks from now. She's moving fast. Dennis was quiet for a long time. Okay, he said finally. Let's move. The demand letter went out the following Friday. Meridian Sound Group's legal department called Frank DeLuca on Monday morning. The call lasted 40 minutes. Frank reported back to Cole and Dennis that afternoon with characteristic restraint. They're talking. They're not comfortable, but they're talking. Cole had not told anyone at the hotel about any of this. Not Pete, not Janet, not anyone. But the atmosphere had changed in ways he couldn't entirely prevent. Roger Caldwell had not returned since the conversation at the valet stand. The hotel management had not raised the protocol issue again. Janet Kowalski watched Cole with a slightly increased attentiveness that she expressed by occasionally bringing him coffee without comment and asking, in a tone that was more direct than her usual register, whether everything was okay. It's getting there, Cole told her once. She nodded and went back inside. Pete Dawson, for his part, had developed a theory that Cole was involved in some kind of romantic situation with a hotel guest, which Cole neither confirmed nor denied, because the actual explanation was too complicated for a shift handoff conversation. In the evenings, Cole went to Vanderbilt. Dennis was declining. The rate was gradual but clear. Less time upright, more sleep. The particular geography of his face changing in the way that faces change when the body is working very hard on something that has nothing to do with ordinary life. Doctor. Pemberton spoke to Cole in the corridor one evening with the particular balance of directness and care that she'd maintained throughout. Less than she'd originally projected, possibly, she said. 8 to 12 weeks, adjusted. The second treatment round had helped briefly and then stopped helping. Cole sat with his father in the evenings, and they talked about things that had nothing to do with the case. About the construction work Dennis had done, about a trip they'd taken to the Smoky Mountains when Cole was 9, about a dog they'd had briefly when Cole was 12. They talked about Cole's mother, Patricia, who had left when Cole was 15 and was now living in Phoenix with a second family, and about the particular complicated shape of that departure and what it had meant for both of them. One evening, Dennis said, "You don't have to keep coming every day." "I know," Cole said. "I'm not going anywhere immediately." "I know," Cole said again. They were quiet for a while. "She has a good voice," Dennis said eventually. Cole looked at him. "Reba. She always had a good voice." He paused. "She did right by the song. I'll give her that. Even without knowing, she sang it the way I heard it." Cole looked at the window. "That matters," Dennis said, "more than I thought it would." RCA Studio B on Music Row was the oldest surviving recording studio in Nashville, a low brick building that had absorbed 50 years of music into its walls, from the earliest days of the Nashville sound through generations of country and gospel and sessions that had become, in retrospect, history. Reba McEntire had recorded there before. She knew the room. The session was on a Thursday morning in early March, low sky and cold, the trees on Music Row still bare. Cole had taken the day off work. He drove his father from Vanderbilt. Dennis had been discharged 2 days earlier into a palliative home care arrangement that Dr. Pemberton had helped coordinate, which meant he was in his apartment now, with a nurse who came twice daily and a hospital bed that had been moved into the living room. Dennis wore a grey flannel shirt and the good shoes he kept for occasions, and said very little in the car, which Cole read not as sadness, but as the particular quality of attention Dennis brought to things he wanted to remember precisely. They were met at the studio entrance by Donna Fielding, who shook Dennis's hand with the same practical directness she brought to everything and said, "She's been looking forward to this." The studio itself was smaller than Cole had imagined. The main tracking room, perhaps 40 feet across, with a low control room window at one end and vintage acoustic panels on the walls. The gear was a mix of old and new. The producer, a man named James Albury, who had worked with REBA for years, greeted them with the warm, unhurried professionalism of someone who understood exactly what this session was and why it mattered. REBA was in the corner of the control room, talking to James when they came in. She stopped mid-sentence and crossed the room to meet Dennis. They shook hands. "Mr. Harrington," she said. "Thank you for this," Dennis said, with the direct simplicity that was his characteristic register when he was moved by something. "Thank you for writing it," she said. Cole sat in the control room and watched through the glass as REBA McENTIRE recorded "Leaving a Light," the song his father had written in an apartment on Gallatin Pike in 1999, the song that had traveled through corrupted hands and emerged with the wrong names attached, the song that had played on the radio while Cole was in elementary school and his father had gone quiet. She sang it 3 full times, each time with a slightly different quality. The first straightforward, feeling the room, the second with more air in the phrasing, looser, the third with a settledness that everyone in the control room recognized as the take without anyone having to say so. James Albury made a sound that was not quite a word and nodded at his engineer. Dennis was sitting in a chair beside Cole, hands on his knees, watching through the glass with the quality of attention Cole had seen him bring to the road on long drives, total and quiet and fully present. When the third take ended and the room went silent, and REBA took off her headphones and looked toward the glass, Dennis raised one hand in a brief, clear gesture that meant yes. Meridian Sound Group, faced with Frank DeLuca's documentation, the pending copyright challenge, and, most significantly, the public announcement of REBA's re-recording and the increasingly specific press coverage that was beginning to surround the story, made a decision that their litigators had almost certainly advised against on principle, but their communications team had almost certainly required on practical grounds. They settled. The terms, which Cole and Dennis reviewed with Frank on a Tuesday afternoon in Frank's office, included retroactive credit reassignment on Leave the Light On to include Dennis Harrington as the sole original author, a financial settlement covering back royalties calculated from the original 2000 release date, structured as a lump sum payment that, as Frank noted without elaboration, would cover the medical debt with a meaningful amount remaining. A formal letter from Meridian acknowledging the administrative error in the original registration, language that everyone in the room understood as the most they were going to get from a corporation protecting itself, and that Dennis accepted without comment, and a commitment to include the corrected credit in all future digital and physical distributions of the original recording. Danny Kurtz, as it turned out, had been cooperative in the final weeks of the process. He had given Frank a deposition, still technically sealed pending a separate inquiry, in which he described receiving a call from Mitch Vance in the summer of 1999, asking if he and Prala would be willing to attach their names to a composition for a standard fee. He had not asked questions he probably should have asked. He said this plainly, without extensive self-defense, and Cole found himself unable to sustain much anger toward a man who had been a 26-year-old session writer trying to pay rent and had made a bad decision at the request of someone with more power than him. Roger Caldwell resigned from Meridian Sound Group in late March, officially for reasons of personal transition. The press release used the phrase, "pursuing new opportunities." Frank told Cole, without elaboration, that this had been a condition of the settlement structure. Cole did not push for more detail. Mitch Vance had died in 2019. There was no reaching him. Dennis Harrington came home from the settlement meeting in the back seat of Cole's Civic, the cracked rear bumper cover catching the afternoon sun as they moved through Nashville traffic, and was quiet for most of the drive back to his apartment. When Cole pulled up to the curb, Dennis did not get out immediately. "How much of this would have happened," Dennis said, "if you hadn't said something to her on that curb?" Cole thought about it honestly. "None of it," he said. Dennis nodded slowly. "I spent a long time," he said, "deciding that making noise wasn't worth it, that there was nothing to find and no one who would listen." He paused. "I was wrong about the second part." Cole said nothing. "Not about the first part," Dennis said, with the dry precision that had always been his version of humor. "There genuinely was nothing to find for a long time. Until Roy Fenton's storage unit." "Until Roy Fenton's storage unit," Dennis agreed. He opened the door slowly, and Cole came around to help him up the front steps. The Leaving a Light re-release came out on the first Friday of April. As part of a limited digital release, REBA announced with a short public statement that described the song's history with more directness than her publicist had originally recommended, and less than the press was hoping for. It said, in part, this song was written by Dennis Harrington of Nashville, Tennessee, in 1999. It should have carried his name from the beginning. It carries it now. The statement ran in Billboard, in the Tennessean, and in every country music trade publication within 48 hours. It went further than that. The story had enough elements that the general entertainment press picked it up, and for about a week, the name Dennis Harrington was in more places than it had been in his entire previous life combined. Dennis read the coverage from his hospital bed. He'd been readmitted in the third week of March as the decline accelerated. With the same careful, deliberate attention he brought to everything. He didn't say much about it. When Cole asked him how it felt, he thought for a long time before answering. "Accurate," he said. "It feels accurate." Cole was at work on a Thursday morning in late April. An ordinary shift, low clouds, the first real warmth of spring beginning to show in the way the light hit the buildings on Broadway. When his phone rang with the call from Dr. Pemberton that he had been expecting and not expecting simultaneously for months, he drove to Vanderbilt. He sat with his father for the last 4 hours. The nurse, a quiet man named Stephen Barr, gave him space and stayed available. Dennis was not conscious for most of it, but he was present in the room in the way that people are present in rooms at the end, fully, with a gravity that Cole felt physically. At 2:17 p.m., Dennis Harrington died in room 714 at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, in the city where he had arrived 40 years earlier with a battered Gibson and a notebook full of songs. Cole sat with him for a long time after. The service was held on a Saturday morning at a small church off Gallatin Pike, not far from the apartment where Dennis had written the song, which Cole had not thought about until he was standing in the parking lot before the service and realized the proximity. The congregation was modest. Some cousins from Knoxville, Gary Whitmore, Dennis's old friend who had helped with the move in 2002 and who had come down from Murfreesboro specifically, Roy Fenton, who shook Cole's hand at the door with the quiet weight of someone who understood exactly how much his storage unit had mattered. Janet Kowalski came. Pete Dawson came, which surprised Cole, and arrived wearing an actual tie, which surprised him more. Frank DeLuca came and stood near the back. Donna Fielding came, representing REBA, who was on tour in the West and had sent a handwritten note that Donna delivered personally and that Cole read 3 times in the parking lot before going inside. The service was simple. A pastor who had known Dennis briefly spoke about work and faith and the particular kind of dignity that belongs to people who persist without recognition. Gary Whitmore told a story about Dennis in the early Nashville years that made people laugh. Cole did not speak publicly. He sat in the front row and listened. At the end of the service, the pastor played "Leaving a Light" through the small speaker system, the new recording, REBA's voice in a small church on Gallatin Pike, the song filling the room with the structure and the phrasing and the bridge lyric that had survived 23 years of misattribution completely intact, because some things cannot be fully taken even when they are taken. Cole sat in the front row and listened to his father's song. The shift was ordinary. Cars came and went. Pete told a long story about a parking dispute that Cole absorbed without fully hearing. The sky over Broadway was pale blue and wide, the first real spring sky, and the light at that hour came at an angle that made the whole street look briefly like something worth keeping. Janet appeared at the stand at mid-morning. "How are you?" she said. "I'm okay," Cole said. He meant it, approximately. She nodded. She didn't push it. She stood beside him at the stand for a moment, looking out at Broadway. "You did something," she said, not as a question. "My dad did something," Cole said. "A long time ago. I just made sure someone heard about it." Janet was quiet for a moment. "That counts," she said. She went back inside. Cole stood at the valet stand and watched a cab pull up and a family climb out. 2 parents, 2 kids, luggage, the particular controlled chaos of arrival, and moved forward to help with the bags, the way he always did, the way the job required. And the February air had given way to something softer now, something that carried the faint, early smell of the city in spring, of the city waking up, of Nashville going about its enormous and ordinary life all around him. The song was in the air. It had always been in the air. Now it had the right name.